A few years ago, I moved to a relatively remote part of my town with my boyfriend. We owned a small section of land beyond our home which consisted of the woods, a creek, and general shrubbery. I would take my dogs out there every day for walks and one day came across what looked like a campsite where a homeless person would live. There was a basket full of sticks and what I assumed was being used for firewood, a mattress, blankets, and tarps. It looked relatively kept, so I assumed someone had to be actively staying there. I went off in a different direction and decided to stay away from that area. I had told my boyfriend about what I came across that day, and we were trying to figure out what we should do to eventually remove this person, as this was our land and we didn't feel comfortable having someone camping out so close to our home. We sort of forgot about it for a few months, until one day I was walking past that area again with the dogs, and curiosity got the best of me, so I went to have a snoop. Once again, I found the same layout, though much more unkempt. There were some leftover food items and the remainder of a fire. I quickly left. The same night as I was waiting on my boyfriend to get home, I was in the kitchen cooking and facing the window that looked out towards the woods. I thought that I had seen someone standing next to a tree, but it was so dark and I have horrible eyesight, so I didn't try to overthink it. But then I actually started thinking. Our home and property were fenced and that little campsite I saw again today, I freaked myself out. Could it be the person that was staying there? I knew that someone probably was, but I didn't think they would want to show themselves, if that makes sense. I carried on cooking and thinking on it, hyping myself up in a bad way. I kept looking around, but I couldn't see anyone, so I hoped it was just anxiety and my overthinking. And then there was a knock at the back door. We had a curtain covering the window on the back door, so I couldn't see who was knocking, and I wouldn't be able to see from the window where I was standing either. I went to the door and moved the curtain, and no one was there. The dogs had started barking at that point, which if you have dogs you know, that when you feel anxious, them barking can freak you out even more. I had my Alexa playing music and I turned her off to be able to hear better. The dogs were barking in the front room at the windows, but I couldn't see anything. I had shut the curtains fully then and calmed the dogs down, but I was feeling very, very uneasy. Suddenly, a noise came from the kitchen, like someone was jumping against the door. The dogs started going crazy again and ran to the kitchen, and I went after them. The door kept jittering and moving. Someone was trying to get in. The pole that was keeping up the curtain fell and I saw a man, wearing what looked like a white face mask and some sort of cover to conceal the rest of his face. He kept pushing on the door and I was hyperventilating at that point. If I left out the front door, he could run and get to me in seconds, so I left the dogs downstairs and ran upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. I felt so scared. I was scared for my dogs and I called the police as I could hear the back door keep being hit and the dogs barking so loudly. I remember how I haven't even been able to tell the police my address before the noises had stopped, and I could just hear the barking, but no more bashing sounds. I was momentarily convinced that he had gotten in, but surely I would be able to hear some sort of struggle, as my dogs were two large German shepherds. Yet there was nothing that I could hear. The police did arrive very soon. My back door was still intact. I spoke to them through the bathroom window, as I was scared to come down before they had assessed the house from the outside. And I had to calm the dogs down before I let the police in, as the dogs were very riled up then. I had told the police about the homeless person who lived in the woods, and they had a look in the area and couldn't seem to find anyone or anything suspicious. That was until a few weeks later when myself and my partner, along with the dogs, had walked down to the campsite again to see if it had been abandoned or not. on the slim chance that they did have something to do with the break-in. This is what we found. The white mask that I spoke about before. How I couldn't tell what it was. It was hanging on the tree. Gloves and boots were hidden in a bag which we found by the creek, soaking wet. Apparently all of this wasn't there when the police went down there that night. Though the campsite for the first time definitely looked abandoned, we sent pictures to the police who came down again soon after. But even though they had all this evidence, it was safe to say nothing was ever done about it. Most likely as there was no successful break-in. We got everything removed from the campsite and taken away in a skip. Who knows what would have happened if the back door gave in. I still worry thinking about it. It's left me with a lot more unresolved anxiety than I already had. It happened during summer vacation when I was 11. Me and my parents always go to South India for at least 1 month to see the family. And during the entire month of June, there is what we call in our little village the Mango Festival. It's a religious festival where divinity statues are exhibited in parades. There is also a large alley filled all along with small temporary stands where people can buy lots of different stuff like street food, fruits, toys, clothing, and more at very cheap prices. My mom and I always go to these little stores in the evening at like 5 or 6 when it's already dark, because going during the daytime is too exhausting, with the unbearable heat plus the crowd. At that time, the alley is still very bright, enlightened by the stores and the decorative lighting. That day, my mom decided to stop at a shoe flip-flop stand to buy me some pairs. The seller proceeded to show my mom the collections, and when he noticed my presence, he had locked his eyes on me. At the beginning, it did not bother me that much. I just thought that it might look like somebody that he knew, but he just kept staring at me the whole time. He knew exactly the time to stare at me. When my mom was looking at my direction, he stopped, and then he would stare back again when she looked away. It was obvious at that point, and it made me feel very uncomfortable. Eventually, we had to leave without buying anything, but the seller insisted that we should come tomorrow because he had a new shipment or whatever new collections were arriving. 2 days after, my mom called me to go to the festival stands, but I was reluctant to go with her this time. I told her that I was tired and that I didn't want to, but she yelled at me saying that I'm always lazy and wasting my summer vacation by staying at home all day. So I went with her. Our first stop was at the cheap jewelry store, and then my mom made me do something that I always hated. But she did that all the time in order to help me with my shyness. She said, "Take my purse and go to the shoe stand by yourself and buy a pair that you like. I'll be watching you from here." I refused at first, but she progressively raised her voice, and to avoid being humiliated in front of the other kids, I did what she said. When he saw me approaching his stand, he welcomed me with his unsettling smile. He proceeded to show all the new sandals, and I was his only customer. He even took the time to put the sandals on me one by one, asking if it fit well. At this point, I just took whatever freaking shoe quickly to get out of there. And now, it was the time for the checkout. I was and still am stressed to order or to talk to a vendor. I used to stutter a lot during these social situations, but this time it was different. It wasn't only stress, but there was also this fear and this gut feeling, saying that this man was strange and that I shouldn't be here with him alone. I handed him the money and was waiting for my change, but his demeanor suddenly changed. He became fidgety and showed frustration over the cash register. He then said that the cash register had broke for some unknown reason and that it wouldn't open. I glanced outside to see if my mom was still watching me, and she was still observing. When we had made eye contact, she made a gesture with her hand, telling me to hurry. She was observing at an angle, and as I was next to the cash register at the corner, I couldn't see her properly anymore. At the same time, the seller told me that he had another register in the trailer, He then took my money and went to his trailer. It was a sort of open shop, so you could see his trailer if you were right in front of the shop. He went inside of it for a long time, and I could hear voices of another person inside. They were talking, but I could not tell what they were getting on about. So for like 10 minutes, I was just standing there waiting patiently, and peeking back at my mom occasionally to notice her of my presence at the checkout. And then another client entered the shop and was looking at the merchandise. She asked me where the vendor was, and I told her that he was in the trailer. At the sound of our conversation, the vendor peeked out from the trailer window and said to the woman, "We don't take any more clients, ma'am. We're closing soon." The woman left soon after. It seemed strange that he had decided to close so suddenly and so early. It was only 6 p.m., and usually the shops would close later at 8 or even 9. I couldn't leave, and I was waiting to get my change back, when the vendor peeked from the trailer's window and said that he finally managed to get my change. And then he made a sign with his hand, as if to say to get inside. I was unsure about what he had wanted, so I said nothing, and I waited there, awkwardly. After a short moment, he peeked back and said, "You can come now." I was confused. Why couldn't he just come outside and give me my change back? And why the heck did he take so much time? I didn't say anything. Instead, I peeked back outside to see my mom. When she saw my concerned face, she finally decided to come and help me. I said to the seller, "Actually, I'm waiting for my mom." When my mom entered the shop, the seller got out of his trailer almost immediately and handed my change back. He was not frustrated anymore, but smiling and very talkative. He even asked my mom if we were from here, and to which she responded that we were from France and that we were spending the summer vacation in our hometown. My mom and I went to some other shops, but I could still see other clients coming to the shoe shop, even though he said he was closing soon. By the time my mom had finished up her shopping, it was 8 p.m., and on our way back, I could still see the lights from his shop, and when we got closer, I could even see that he was using the same cash register that was supposed to be broken. At that age, I didn't realize how creepy this whole thing was. It just seemed odd and awkward. Years later, I finally realized that his gaze, his behavior, and his touches were all so wrong. And that night, I bet his intentions were even worse. Luckily, that night was the last time that I ever saw him. During the festival of the following year, I couldn't find his stand anymore. The slot was occupied by a street food stand. As a man in my 20s, I thought that I should share the 3 times that I was almost kidnapped while growing up. The first story happened when I was 4 or 5, and this happens to be one of my earliest memories. So one summer, my grandparents would invite my immediate family to go camping with them. They have an RV which was just big enough to cram all of us in. So we RV'd camped at a place called Goose Pond in northern Alabama. During this trip, my grandpa taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels. After many tries and falls, I was actually able to ride my bike pretty well. So, out of excitement, I asked my parents if my brother, who was a few years older than me, and I could go out to ride our bikes. They said that we could ride this short loop where about 60% of the loop can be seen from the RV. So my brother and I grabbed our bikes and we took off. While riding around the loop, nothing eventful ever happened until we had reached the final turn. This turn was barely out of view from my parents' end of the RV, so when my brother and I turned the loop, a car pulled up behind us. So we got off of our bikes and stepped off the road to let the car pass. When the car got parallel to us, it stopped. A man from the car rolled down his window and started talking to us. He said something along the lines of, "I have candy in my car if you want some. Just come over here and I'll give you a piece." Ignorant young me took a step in the man's direction, but as soon as I took that step, My brother grabbed my shoulder and said, "Let's go back to the RV." As soon as we had pedaled away, the man drove off. This second story happened when I was 10. For some background information, in my small hometown, the Civic Center basically shares a parking lot with the baseball fields. So my family was at the Civic Center to watch my little sister graduate from preschool. The graduation was around 5 p.m., and I had a baseball game at the fields next door at 7 p.m. So after the graduation, I asked my parents if I could walk across the parking lot to find my team while they cleaned up, and they gave me their blessing. As soon as I had walked out of the front door and turned to head to the baseball fields, I saw 2 men loitering in the parking lot. They saw that I was alone and they asked me to come over to them. Me, being oblivious to the danger that I was in, said that I needed to get to my game that was going to start soon. They asked if I played baseball, and why my parents would let someone like me walk all by myself. They offered to walk with me, and I replied, "Oh, no thanks, I'm just going to the baseball fields." When they noticed that I wasn't cooperating, as they had originally hoped, one of the men lunged in my direction and grabbed me. Luckily, I was far enough away that he didn't get to me, and I took off. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life before this. Luckily, the men didn't run after me, and I found my team moments later. When my parents got to the field, they were panicking to find me. Apparently, someone had reported those 2 men hanging out in the parking lot in the Civic Center, and my parents were scared to death that they got me. My last story happened when I was 14. Again, as some background information, my house is located next to a major highway, with several gas stations and convenience stores within walking distance of it. My hometown is one of the safest towns in the state. Close to this incident, my town was ranked in the top 25 safest towns in the state. Because of this, my parents didn't mind if I walked to the store to grab snacks, as long as I had asked their permission first. So one day, I was walking to the store. Nothing happened on the way down there, so I walked into the store to buy some snacks. On the way back, I noticed a truck driving by me. When he passed, I looked up and saw the man driving was staring right at me. He wasn't paying attention to the road, just me. So he passed me, and I saw him turn around at the entrance of the neighborhood by my house and started heading back in my direction. At this time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I see people turning around there all the time. When he drove by me the second time, he was going noticeably slower than the first time, and he was staring me down. When he got parallel to me, he stopped and opened his door to try to grab me. God must have been looking out to me, because as soon as he did this, a car had pulled up behind him and forced him to continue on down the road. As he drove away, I watched him and saw him turn around again and start heading in my direction. At this point, I was panicking. I took off behind my neighbor's house and hopped the fence into my backyard and went into my house. I remembered that I was home alone, and the terror started to sink in. I immediately rushed to the window to see the man carefully scanning the area where he last saw me. He was looking for me. He stayed in his car, going so slow that it took him what seemed like 5 minutes to pass my house. When he started to pass my house, I noticed that he was trying to see through my windows from the road. I ducked down and hid, only looking through the bottom corner of the window. Eventually, I saw him speed off, never to return again. As a boy growing up, people never thought these types of things could happen to me. It is a mystery to me how I was able to avoid kidnappers 3 times. Most people aren't that lucky. To all the young people and parents that are listening to this, it doesn't matter who it is, boy or girl. Bad people are lurking everywhere.